Hi. If I could give one message today to anybody out there who has a disability and is feeling isolated or depressed, that message would be that you're not alone. And I want to share with you today what life has been like living with a hidden disability. My name is Christine and I'm from Ireland. And I was born with a condition called arteriovenous malformation, AVM for short. When I was a baby, it wasn't really obvious that there was anything really wrong, other than my mother observed that I had like what would be described as a tea stain mark on my left leg. Um, like any diligent parent or guardian, she observed me as I got a few months older. I used to, when I'd lay on my back, I would always lift my left leg up. So she would try and massage my leg and bring it back down, but it was a nagging feeling for her. Why was this lovely little baby always raising her leg up? I wasn't able to verbalize what I was feeling, of course. So it was just an observation she made and she flagged it with the doctor. Um, Moving on from there, a couple of years passed and they kept a watchful eye on my progression, but they didn't really feel anything was of any concern. Now, as I got a little bit older, as in 6, maybe 7 years old, it became obvious that my left leg was growing a lot faster than my right leg. Um, I wasn't complaining of pain at that point in time, but it was observed by my mum that I used to get very, very tired if I walked a lot. Um, Sometimes not even that far, but I would feel tired. So that was just another observation that she made. So the remedy for that at the time was to prescribe me. I went and I got fitted for these um, special type of shoes, that had an extra additional heel on one leg to try and balance up the discrepancy of the length of the legs, so that I wouldn't have issues with my hips. That was the logic behind it. So that was the first port of call that we did. And I remember being a little bit self conscious at the time, even though I was still small. But I was aware that the shoes were different. They weren't like my peers. But at the same time, I just wore them, and that was it. Um, I was very, very lucky growing up, actually, where I grew up. Because I never have recollection in childhood of any form of bully. There was no form of bullying. There was no um, discrimination because I was a little bit different from the other kids. So I was really, really lucky in that regard because we had a very innocent and sheltered childhood, I suppose. And we all got along. So I was really lucky and I was blessed with that. The only thing I can ever recall at that point in time, I do recall one of the kids, we had a hockey lesson, and I do recall it was the first time anyone had actually verbalized or noticed that my shoe, one heel was bigger than the other. Um, and he literally just, I think he probably thought the heel fell off my shoe, he pointed it out to me, but that was it. He asked the question. It's natural for kids to be curious, what's the story with the shoe? And that was it. There was no more about it. And yeah, very, very lucky in that regard. So skip forward to when I was about 10, I had spent years at this point going in and out of pediatric clinics where they would measure my leg growth over the years. So it meant regular hospital visits for measurements just to see where we were at, because they were conscious of the fact, I was coming up to near 10 years old and there would be a lot of changes in the body. So they were monitoring with a view to maybe doing a procedure to try and stunt the growth. So we did do that. We did that when I was 10 years old. They actually put knee pins into my left knee, and that did work very, very well. It only left me, in time. When they went back and did measurements, we discovered that there was only a very small discrepancy, like half a centimeter or thereabouts, maybe even less, which was a significant catch up. My right leg, the surgery really assisted with that and made my right leg catch up, which was great. So I didn't have any major noticeable imbalances in my hip or my posture. Um, so in and around that period as well, I developed on my lower left leg where I have I suppose I should say my birthmark over that time as I was getting older started to darken at the bottom of my leg. So it went from being knee to heel, a T stain. It developed into, at the bottom part of the leg, more of a purple mark. The birthmark got very, very pronounced. So at around 10 years old, I actually hit puberty at 10 years old. And looking back, I think possibly the blood flow, the changes in the body, probably that's why what happened next coincided with puberty. But in and around 10 years old, I got my first ulceration on my leg. So what actually happened at that time, I suppose because I was so young and the knowledge wasn't all that great either. At the time, I had a great GP. He was a fabulous man. But the knowledge wasn't really there, with children with arteriovenous malformation. We didn't have access to computers to just Google something. It was very harder to attain information. But when I got that first ulcer and my mum brought me to the GP, how it looked visually did have a ring-like appearance. So he at the time diagnosed me with what he thought was ringworm because it was very raw and it was circular, exactly on the area that was the most pronounced part of my birthmark. And it had never happened before. So, in hindsight, from my recollection, I can see where he came up with that diagnosis, but it was very far from the reality of what was actually going on. What was actually happening was I was developing ulcers. Um, so to be honest with you, I don't, the knowledge wasn't there at the time. We may have even given it a little dressing, something simple, but we didn't have the knowledge that we have now regarding vascular dressings, and what they can do. We didn't have that. So I think we just put on whatever cream he gave us, and that was it. Just kind of carried on as best we could, um, at that time. But it never really went away. It started to develop more and more, and the ulcers got worse. So by the time I was gone into my teenage years, they had really escalated a lot, and I was there muddling along, just trying to get on, and in my mind, be like everyone else and be normal and all of that. I just wanted to get on and do my teenage things. We were all daft, and we had a lot of freedom living in the west of Ireland as well. It was still very much rural when I was growing up, and I have very happy memories of it. But so I would carry on as best I could. But where it started to really impact on me in my teenage years was, I suppose, that transition over, to, you'd be more conscientious of your clothes, or you'd want to wear things that maybe your peers were wearing. But it was blatantly obvious that I couldn't do that. Even for me, I would have I loved flowy skirts and, things like that. And I always remember actually one event where I went into my city for a day and I had this lovely red flowy skirt on, but underneath it was this very ferocious ulceration that was bleeding, and it was uncovered because I didn't even really know what I was doing with this leg. I was just trying to get through the day at that time, you know. And I always remember, if anyone noticed it that day, there was a look of, maybe some people were horrified, like, what's going on with this girl? Um, some people were like, oh, you know, real mammyish, like, are you okay? You know, and that's when I first started really feeling like, oh, you know, this is this is not normal. I'm different. I would have had, I suppose, a more negative outlook on what was happening in my body. I was at a very sensitive age, being a teenager. Self consciousness was kicking in, and that was really really hard, I have to say, because you just want to be like your peers, don't you? So as we went along, then we had a lot of doctor's appointments, but we weren't really getting anything substantial, any real knowledge of what was going on. It was my own mother's persistence, you know. She became a real fighter for me. I suppose she was looking to the future, and she knew that, you know, we couldn't stay going living in ignorance. She knew there was something really wrong that needed to be, you know, assisted. And she was wonderful. When I look back now, you know, she was doing what any mommy would do. But I remember at the time, you know, she would be really fighting for me, you know, when it would come to dealing with doctors or specialists. Not so much the specialists were the issue, but sometimes you could have maybe secretaries who weren't always attending to the duties they should be attending to. So she was on the phone. She never let a day pass, like, what's happening, what's the progress, what are you doing? She was a great advocate for me. And I look back now and I'm so grateful that I had her for that, because I don't think I would have had any quality of life only for her. But you know, she'd be on the phone like, oh, I rang you last week, I rang you yesterday, I rang you this. And I'd be dying. I'd be saying, oh my God. I remember one call, she really had it out with a secretary. And I remember thinking, oh, ma'am, you're going to have us locked up if you keep on showering abuse at this secretary, you know. But she needed to get it done, because you would fall through the system otherwise very easily. So anyway, when we came to throughout the teenage years, I suppose it's worth mentioning. Um, I did find that things were accumulating a lot. You know, how I was feeling regarding my body, how I was feeling regarding fitting in with peers. I was starting to notice I couldn't do things that other peers could do. Um, I was advised, rightly or wrongly, I was advised in my teenage years to step back from sport. I had been participating in quite a lot of sports teams growing up, and I really, really loved it. But the advice was, because there was a lack of knowledge of what was happening, they did have fear that there could be, you know, very serious issues around blood loss if I got injured during playing sport. So the advice was to come away from the sport, which in hindsight now really impacted me, because I did love playing sport. But so there was things like that were kind of happening that were really taking its toll on my psyche, where I was falling very quickly into depression. Now, I didn't really speak very much about that depression. I just kind of tried to muddle along, and I had various groups of people who I was friends with. So I was just trying to get through, having fun and doing the usual messing you do when you're a youngster, you know. Um, I tried to make the most out of it as best I could, but deep down under the surface, in my own personal time, I was very, very depressed. It really had taken its toll on me. You know, it was about living with pain all the time, constant recurring infections, having these wounds that were too graphic even I'd say to even put up. I had contemplated maybe editing a video and putting some imagery up, but I don't think I'll even do that. I'm afraid I'll get struck with the splintered baton of YouTube if I do, but trust me, they were very, very graphic, you know. So all of that was hard in the teenage years. Um, so around I think 16 or 17, I was with a great doctor here in my city. Fabulous doctor who held his hands up and said, "Look, I don't think I have the knowledge for what is going on with your daughter." Um, but he did say he thought he may know somebody in the UK who may know a little bit more about what he. I think he suspected it was AVM, or he had maybe heard about it somewhere along the line. But the great thing was he held the hands up. He didn't. He wasn't afraid to admit defeat in a way. It wasn't defeat. He made the right move. You know, his ego didn't get in the way, thankfully, and he forwarded me onto a surgeon in the UK. So initially, myself and my mum would have travelled over and back for consultations, and they had done a couple of procedures where put they put dye into my leg during a procedure to see where the blood vessels and the veins and the arteries were all connecting. And thereafter, he said to me that it wasn't his field either, but he knew exactly the man I needed to talk to, which was wonderful because he was also in the hospital. Um, and he came down, and that's where my life changed. This man, Professor Nigel Stansfield, was his name. An incredible, incredible man. He's since passed away, and it was like losing a member of family when he went. He was just so knowledgeable and so competent and such a sage in his profession. I always felt so confident with my life in his hands with him. And for the vast array of knowledge that he had, he was such an open person. You know, he would come in and the hands would be behind the head and the leg would be, you know, he was just an amazing open man, you know. And he always listened and he always took on board things you were saying. He really valued that as well, you know. The perspective of the patient was really important for him. So he took me on board, and we thereafter did multiple surgeries, where he would have stripped veins, removed veins, or done embolizations with the lower leg and my foot, and also skin grafting to try and cover over some of the ulceration. Now, unfortunately, with my leg, the skin is so diminished in that one region at the bottom part of the leg that the skin grafts never actually took. So as a result, we had to let them heal naturally, which is a very, very long process. But it there was a big change, even though there was still ulceration, there was open wounds and dressings and all of that. There was a massive improvement with the pain level of what I was experiencing, which was phenomenal because it really gave me a better quality of life, to be honest with you. Now, in saying that, going back to different items, medical items that were needed, he prescribed to me in that period of time compression stockings, because what was actually happening was my blood was flowing from my heart into my leg, but where I had that cluster of excess veins and arteries, it was incapable of pumping it out of the leg back to the heart. So what would happen is the leg would gradually swell up because the blood would pool in the leg, and then the skin would open and ulcerate, and you know, from there you could get infections. So in an effort to try and kind of prevent some of this pressure in the leg, he prescribed compression stockings, which are a mainstay in my life. I remember when he first prescribed them, I remember feeling like, oh, because I was young and feeling, oh my God, like they're like something my nana would have worn, an older person. But looking at it now, years down the line, and when I reflect back, and I think I would have had zero quality of life only for them, because procedures and surgery are one thing, but it's about maintenance as well. And without them, like even if I never do it because it's just not worth the pain and the suffering and the setback. Because if I don't wear my compression stockings for any amount of time, my ulcers will just get bigger and bigger, so it's not worth it. There has been occasionally over the years a day where I might be at home and I might say, oh, I'll maybe leave off the compression and let a bit of air at my leg. Or I'd still have bandages underneath, but not to have the tightness of the compression as well. But to be honest with you, even if I were to do that in the house, after about 2 to 3 hours, it's just agony. So because of that, I'm more than happy to embrace the granny stockings. And they give me quality of life, which is wonderful. But yeah, God bless that man. There's some really great people in the professional industry or the medical industry. So there's some really great ones out there. I just want to throw in as well, while I'm at this point in time, the real importance too of having a good rapport with your doctor, particularly if you're younger, because I can recall being, when I started going to my first set of appointments with that particular surgeon, and I was now 17 or 18 years old, we'll say. I moved to London so that I could attend that hospital. So I started to work there and live there. But I remember when I first attended on my own, without my mummy in tow. And I remember how daunting that experience was in the beginning. It really used to bother me, and it really used to make me feel so depressed and alone. It was shocking. I felt like there was nobody in the world going through what I was going through. That's what it felt like. It felt so lonely to be facing into hospitals when all you really want to do is be at work with your pals or out and about. So it is hard. And I would say to anyone, if they're young or early adulthood and they're experiencing that, always pay attention to what your experience is when you're dealing with a doctor, because there are great doctors, but there are also doctors too who are very wrapped up maybe in their own world, or they're excessively busy. If something doesn't feel right, if something is telling you the rapport isn't great, or you're not feeling 100% about the doctor, never feel reluctant to speak up for yourself or ask for a second opinion, particularly if it comes to surgeries, because the last thing you want is to have a doctor who you're not feeling too good about come along and start making suggestions, and something is really telling you something's not right. You're well within your rights to query it or ask for a second opinion. So just bear that in mind, because it can be intimidating, especially in early adulthood, when you have to take over the baton and start self-advocating. So if I could offer that advice, I really would say don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. But so they're kind of, we carry on. My final surgery was a very, very large surgery. The entirety of the bottom of my leg was sliced open, so that they could get right to the heart of where the AVM was most entangled. It was made clear to me before the surgery that it wasn't going to be able to remove all the excess, but they were going to try and get as much of it as they could in order to give me as long a quality of life as possible, better quality of life. So because the skin grafting didn't work, I was facing into a very long journey of not being able to go to work, not being able to stand on my legs for too long periods of time without elevation. Um, so it meant that my whole life really did crumble around me at that stage because I had to pack up my job. Um, I had to leave London, all my life in London. I had been living there for 7 years, thereabouts, um, and return home. So that was a very hard pill to swallow at that time because I got used to independence and I got used to, being out in the world on my own and doing my own thing. So that was a really, really hard one. However, there is always very, very promising things that can happen, and they can happen at when you're really at the depths in your life. They can happen. My own personal story with that is I came home. I can remember one day looking over. My home is across from the mountains. My house looks across at the mountains in County Clare, and I remember standing looking over at the mountains after coming from London and going, what am I doing here? I felt so lost and isolated again, because now I was used to the hustle and bustle and I was back in a rural community where I wasn't really in any shape to be going out and doing what my peers who I'd left behind when I moved to London, what they were doing, which was, getting on with life. I wasn't able to do that. So in an effort to try and keep myself busy, and I'm always, my character, I don't like to be idle for too long. I love creativity and I love to keep myself busy. And I love little projects, or I just don't like having too much downtime because that's a surefire way to go down in your spirits and to get depressed. That at least that's what I found in my life over the years. So I had went with a family member to the shop one day, and it was springtime, and I saw there was some seeds for sale um, in this particular shop, and I purchased a few, and I just thought, okay, I'll pass a bit of time, and there's plenty of soil and pots and stuff around, so I said I'll plant a few seeds, and what actually really struck me and hooked me into gardening was when I opened the packages, and I think I might have got a mix. Like I think my first seeds were like some carrots and some marigolds and whatever. But for anyone who knows those seeds, they know that they're all so different. Like carrot seeds are tiny, like there's billions of them in a packet, and the marigold seeds look like little feathers, tiny little feathers. And I was so fascinated by the structure of all these seeds when I opened the packages that it just hooked me. That was nature's little way of just hooking me. And that was it. I started to, you know, plant some seeds and start to grow. And I was so interested in observing all these different seedlings, what they look like, their life cycles. And I started going out into the garden and spending as much time as I could, And even though physically I was really not in a good place and it was very, very hard, I never gained so much spiritually or psychologically or mentally than I did in that time. It was like, all I can say the description for me was it was like Mother Nature had wrapped her arms around me and said, right, I'm going to be here. If everyone else is gone, I'm here and I'm going to help you to get through this really tough part of your life. And that's what she did. And it became a total addiction, but it was very freeing. It was such an inspiration for me. And, that period was for quite a few years while I was recovering from that operation. And that period, I don't think I ever interacted so little with anyone in all my life. And yet I was never so nourished, or I was never so feeling, I I never felt as how can I say, basically I had times when I'd be around hundreds of people and I would feel isolated, but yet when I was alone in nature I never felt so taken care of. And that's something to really think about if you can, if you're ever feeling down. You know, I used to often say when I'd be out from morning till night doing one thing or another. And I used to often say to family members, you know, that getting out in nature and doing something, no matter how bad you feel, or no matter what you're going through, or even the most hardened criminal, I say, if you put them in nature and get them to spend time and to do some work, what you get from it, it just totally clears all of your energy. It just uplifts you and re-energizes you and gives you hope and makes you feel you're part of something. There's so much to be gained from nature, particularly if you're struggling in your life or you have a disability. Even if you can only sit outside and breathe the air or watch the clouds, um, you know, there's a much to be gained from nature for your well-being. So that was it. I skip forward along, and you know, I've since had a child. He's 7 years old. So I kept very busy, and it's still about maintenance with my health. You know, I'm on a constant progression. I'm always trying to improve, take things out of the diet. I'm aware of the impact that diet or uh, different lifestyle choices have, you know. Um, so it's about trying to keep a balance and trying to do as much as I can for my general well-being. Um, that's a general synopsis of my own story. I hope I've covered everything that I need to cover. As you can see, I'm not editing my videos at the moment. I'm kind of free flowing, but it is my intention regarding this topic to delve into, on a deeper level, the impacts that having a hidden disability can have. So I'm hoping if you've watched this video that you can tune in for those. I'm probably going to do a little bundle of videos to talk about the different aspects. So socially, the impact having a disability had on me. Um, Physically, go a bit more in depth on that. And mentally, of course, because anyone who suffers with a disability can often find themselves finding things hard, and rightly so, you know. Um, but there is also a light at the end of the tunnel for people. And my message today really is to give to anybody who's watching this that in this lovely age of technology, you know, this is something that I didn't have as a teenager. I didn't have access to information. I knew something was really badly wrong and I didn't know what it was. Or I didn't know that there was anyone in the same position as me. Um, so it's a wonderful thing that we have here just to connect. And my big thing to say as well is if you want to get in touch and you want to just drop something into the comments, talk a bit about your own story, or maybe you want to be more personal and send a direct message, I'd love to hear from you, particularly if you're finding you're having a tough time. You know, I've been there myself and I get it. And sometimes even just to talk to somebody, if you don't feel you can talk to somebody close to you, just to talk to somebody, a random stranger, can do the world of good. Sometimes even just to say something out loud is very therapeutic and gets it off your chest, you know. So please feel free, if you wish to leave a comment, I'd love to hear from you, love to hear your perspective, or maybe you could ask me some questions. So I think I'm going to wrap this one up for now. I don't know how long I've been blathering for, but I hope it comes across okay and that you get some understanding. And the overriding message is really don't feel alone, because you've got technology and there's always people out there who can help. So I'm going to leave you on a sláinte and I'll talk to you soon, and take care. Bye bye.